Hi, this is Jeff Shapiro, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 3rd, 2026 issue of the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump signals U.S. is prepared for a long war against Iran. President Trump also declined to rule out sending ground troops into Iran as the conflict spread into the Gulf countries and Lebanon and Israel exchanged strikes. President Trump said on Monday that the United States would continue attacking Iran for as long as it took to leave it incapable of posing a threat, an indication that an expanding war in the Middle East could continue for weeks or more. Whatever the time is, it's okay, whatever it takes, Mr. Trump said at an event at the White House in his first public comments on the war since U.S.-Israeli airstrikes on Iran began on Saturday. Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have the capability to go far longer than that, he added. We'll do it. The Trump administration has at times offered conflicting rationales and expectations for the campaign. While Mr. Trump signaled that the United States was prepared for a long war and had urged the Iranian people to rise up against the government, the American Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, vowed that the operation would not become another protracted Middle Eastern conflict. This is not Iraq, Mr. Hegseth said at a Pentagon news conference on Monday. This is not endless. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said at the same news conference that the campaign was in its early stages, with more American forces heading to the Middle East. This work is just beginning and will continue, General Kane said, adding that when additional fighter jets arrived in the coming days, the United States would be just about where we want to be in terms of total combat capacity and total combat power. Mr. Trump, in separate news interviews, declined to rule out sending ground troops into Iran and said that still bigger waves of airstrikes were coming. Listing his objectives, he said, "We're destroying Iran's missile capability, and we're doing that hourly." He added that the strikes were annihilating their navy, ensuring that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon, and that it cannot continue to sponsor militant groups across the Middle East. Internationally, he claimed everybody was behind us. They just didn't have the courage to say so. Mr. Trump concluded his remarks at a Medal of Honor ceremony in Washington without taking questions from reporters. In a sign of the widening conflict, Qatar's Ministry of Defense said its Air Force had shot down 2 Su-24 bombers coming from Iran. The first report that Iran, which has fired missiles and drones at its neighbors in the Persian Gulf and Israel in retaliation for the U.S.-Israeli assault, had also sent warplanes into foreign airspace. As U.S. and Israeli planes pounded targets in Iran for the third day, the fighting expanded into Lebanon, where the Iranian allied militia Hezbollah fired rockets into Israel, prompting Israel to bombard the militia's strongholds outside Beirut. Dick Tapper of CNN reported that Mr. Trump told him in a phone call on Monday that the U.S. and Israeli airstrikes against Iran could soon intensify. "We haven't even started hitting them hard. The big wave hasn't even happened," Mr. Trump said, according to CNN. "The big one is coming soon." The New York Post reported that the president has said in an interview that he wasn't ruling out putting American ground troops in Iran. "I don't have the yips with respect to boots on the ground. Like every president says, there will be no boots on the ground." Mr. Trump told the tabloid, "I don't say it." Israeli fighter jets, meanwhile, streaked through the skies over the Iranian capital, Tehran. Their strikes focused on internal security, intelligence, and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps targets in the city, Brigadier General Efi Defrin, an Israeli military spokesman, said in a televised address. Iran launched explosive drones across the Gulf, and 3 U.S. fighter jets were shot down by Kuwaiti air defenses in what the U.S. military called an apparent friendly fire incident. All 6 crew members ejected safely, have been safely recovered, and are in stable condition. The U.S. military said in a statement extending its gratitude to Kuwait for participating in the operation against Iran. 6 U.S. service members have been killed so far in retaliatory attacks by Iran. Mr. Hegseth said an Iranian weapon had eluded U.S. air defenses and hit a fortified American tactical operations center in Kuwait. The U.S. military had initially announced 3 deaths in the strike. On Monday, it said that a 4th service member had died of injuries from the attack and that the bodies of 2 others had been recently recovered. We expect to take additional losses, General Kane said on Monday. More than 550 people have been killed in the strikes on Iran, the Iranian Red Crescent Society said on Monday. The Lebanese Health Ministry said that at least 31 people had been killed in Israeli strikes there. At least 10 people have been killed in Israel, and 6, including civilians, have been killed across the Gulf since Saturday, according to the authorities. The attacks have rattled global markets, sent oil prices soaring, and raised fears of a wider, more intensive regional war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel said on Monday that the U.S.-Israeli attacks were aimed in part at forging the conditions for the brave Iranian people to remove the yoke of tyranny. But critics say that the Trump administration has no clear endgame in Iran, where the leaders have remained defiant since Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the country's supreme leader, was killed in a U.S.-Israeli attack on Saturday. Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, denied news reports that the nation's interim leaders were seeking to negotiate with Washington, and he denounced Mr. Trump for what he called delusional fantasies and for plunging the Middle East into chaos. In a string of fiery social media posts, he wrote, Iran, unlike the United States, has prepared itself for a long war. Speaking on Capitol Hill before a briefing for congressional leaders on Monday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the United States and Iran were not engaged in any diplomatic talks, and the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The United States and Israel have struck more than 2,300 targets in Iran since Saturday, including military bases and weaponry, military officials said. Civilian infrastructure, including Gandhi Hospital in Tehran, has also been damaged. Photo from a news media tour organized by the Iranian authorities showed. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, said that reports of damage to the hospital were extremely worrying and reiterated that health facilities were protected under international law. Iranian missiles and drone attacks have led to explosions in Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and other countries where the United States has military bases. Oil and gas facilities across the Gulf has also been hit, increasing worries about global energy supplies. On Monday, Iranian drones targeted a power plant and an energy facility in Qatar. Soon after, Qatar Energy, one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas, said that it was halting production, which sent the price of natural gas soaring. In Saudi Arabia, a small fire broke out at a refinery after drones targeting it were intercepted. Bahrain said that it intercepted 70 ballistic missiles and 59 drones launched by Iran, and that debris had fallen across the country. The conflict brought more upheaval to war-weary Lebanon, where the Israeli military said it had targeted more than 70 Hezbollah weapons storage facilities and missile launchers in the southern part of the country. The attacks have displaced nearly 30,000 people in Lebanon, according to the country's Ministry of Social Affairs. In southern Lebanon's villages near the Israeli border, parents bundled sleepy children into cars and crawled through miles of traffic toward Beirut, many clutching little more than a change of clothes. In the Dahiya, the densely populated Hezbollah stronghold on the southern outskirts of Beirut, residents fled with barely a suitcase among them as explosions echoed nearby. This country is beautiful, but we need peace, said Musa Hashem, 50, a municipal worker who had fled Beirut's southern suburbs. He was sitting by the roadside with his twin brother and their 8 children. We just want this war to stop, he said. The Lebanese Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, said that his government did not support any military actions launched from Lebanese territory. He demanded that Hezbollah, which has been an entrenched force in the country for decades, limit its activities to the political sphere. How the assault on Iran unfolded. Despite warnings after an earlier wave of killings, top Iranian officials gathered in person, and Israel seized the chance to kill Iran's supreme leader. The Iranian government supposedly drew painful lessons from the 12-day war with Israel and the United States in June. After Israel located some of Iran's top leaders and commanders deep underground during that war, Iranian security officials discovered that Israel had tracked them because their bodyguards were carrying cell phones. Such failures had infuriated Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, according to Iranian and Israeli officials. And yet, the fatal mistakes made by Iran this weekend were even worse than their missteps last June, making the latest assault on the nation's leadership especially deadly. Some of Iran's highest military and intelligence officials gathered in broad daylight above ground at their last known address, the country's National Security Council offices, for a high-level meeting on Saturday morning. Just as much of the world was expecting the United States or Israel, or both, to attack Israeli defense officials said. Even the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, presumed to have been moving from one secret underground hideaway to another, was also above ground at his anything-but-secret official residential compound, the Israeli officials said. Exactly how U.S. and Israeli intelligence officials knew where all these leaders would be at 9:40 a.m. local time on Saturday is unclear. But the two countries exploited that knowledge and other sensitive intelligence collected from Iran to wage a three-wave attack that decimated the Iranian high command and quickly battered Iran's air defenses, the defense officials said. Next came a furious search and destroy mission against Iran's ballistic missile systems, including munitions, launchers, crews, storehouses, and production sites. Crucially, in killing Ayatollah Khamenei, Israel also crossed a new Rubicon, killing the head of state of a sovereign country, something that it had shied away from doing early in the war last June, according to two of the Israeli defense officials. By midday on Sunday, Israeli military officials said that air supremacy in the skies over Iran had been achieved and its jets were flying freely over Tehran. Iran right now is totally exposed to airstrikes, said Amir Ashal, a former commander of the Israeli Air Force. It's only for U.S. forces and the Israeli Air Force to decide where, when, and how. They almost cannot challenge. There's almost total freedom of maneuver. Israeli officials were so emboldened by the freedom of action that some were privately expressing concerns, particularly after a deadly Iranian strike on a residential area west of Jerusalem on Sunday, that the United States wanted to bring the air offensive to a close too quickly. The Israeli Air Force still had many targets to eliminate, Israeli officials said. Ballistic missiles will take time, said Zohar Palti, who headed the political military bureau of Israel's defense ministry after a long career in intelligence. That's not something that you finish today or tomorrow. Let's try to finish, not to cut it short. We need to get the time to clear out the ballistic missiles, he added. Saturday's attack depended on many factors. Chief among them was the element of surprise. In the 12-day war last June, after a decision was made not to attempt to kill Ayatollah Khamenei during the initial strike, he disappeared, and the opportunity did not arise again. For that reason, the planners of Saturday's strike calculated that any attempt to kill a senior Iranian official would have to be made in the first round, or they expected that precautionary measures would soon be taken, Israeli defense officials said. In the war last June, Israel tried to kill additional Iranian officials on the last day of the fighting, according to Mr. Palti and an Israeli defense official, but was forced to call off that attack under pressure from Mr. Trump to stick to a ceasefire. Ahead of Saturday's strike, the military planned for months, looking for an opportunity in which military intelligence would learn in advance of a situation when top Iranian officials would be in the same place, according a separate Israeli defense official with knowledge of the plan. Attacking in the morning hours rather than at night, when Israel has launched prior campaigns against Iran, added to the tactical surprise this time, the official said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A second wave of the attack immediately followed the Saturday morning strike on Iran's leadership, with Israel targeting Iran's surface-to-air missile batteries, especially those defending Tehran, Israeli officials said. Although Israel had hit those systems in previous rounds of fighting and had boasted that they had destroyed them, the Iranians turned out to have restored some anti-aircraft capacity since last June, at least in part by producing some weapons themselves, according to a senior official updated with Air Force operations. A key Israeli armament used Saturday morning, which also aided in the element of surprise, was a ballistic missile capable of being launched by F-15 fighter jets from far away. It was originally developed as a practice target missile for an Israeli anti-ballistic missile system known as Arrow. But the new version, known as the Black Sparrow, allows for strikes on distant targets deep within Iranian territory without requiring the jet to come within range of Iran's surface-to-air missile batteries. Israel first used such a missile in response to an Iranian attack in 2024, striking a radar system, defense officials said. Later, such missiles were used to paralyze Iranian surface-to-air batteries during Israeli attacks in November of 2024, and then again last June, they said. But they haven't always achieved the desired result. On September 9th, Israel used such missiles to try to wipe out a group of Hamas leaders as they met in Qatar to discuss a ceasefire proposal by the Trump administration. But the attack failed to kill senior Hamas officials and killed a member of Qatar's internal security forces, ultimately forcing an apology from Israel under pressure from Mr. Trump. During the third wave of Israel's air offensive this weekend, the military deployed what it called its largest air armada in history, including some 200 planes. Not since the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, when Israel sent all but 12 of its planes to strike the Egyptian Air Force, had it dispatched so many aircraft on an attack mission. Unlike previous operations in which aircraft were sent in small waves, the Israeli Air Force mounted what it called a strategic ambush. In effect, Israel was bringing the entire Air Force to western and central Iran, an Israeli security official said. The pilot's mission: destroy as many Iranian missiles as possible, as fast as possible. The Americans, who joined in that hunt about half an hour after the Israelis first struck Iran's leadership, focused on targets in eastern Iran, an area far from Israel, but relatively close to American bases and forces. Israel took the country's western half. U.S. forces also attacked the Iranian fleet, Mr. Trump said. I have just been informed that we have destroyed and sunk 9 Iranian naval ships, some of them relatively large and important, he wrote on Sunday. We're going after the rest. They will soon be floating at the bottom of the sea also. With Iran's air defenses so badly damaged, Israel was free on Sunday to attack targets and symbols of the government in Tehran. The Israel military said it attacked dozens of the regime's military command centers, including headquarters belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, intelligence headquarters, IRGC, Air Force command centers, and internal security headquarters. Israel and U.S. fighters are also hunting for Iran's long-range ballistic missile launchers, 2 Israeli defense officials said, wary of the type of strike like the ones that killed Israeli civilians in Beit Shemesh on Sunday. Eyal Hulata, former Israeli national security advisor, said that the level of U.S.-Israeli cooperation in this weekend's assault broke new ground. That's a lot of effort by the intelligence communities in both countries to gather information, identify targets, understand where they are at a given time, and to do this on the fly throughout the first day and so far on the second, he said. It's a level we haven't seen before, he said. Attacks on Iran heightened the fears in Cuba, already under U.S. pressure. Many Cubans are wondering if the Trump administration plans to target their country's communist government next. Plainclothes counterintelligence agents from Cuba's Interior Ministry knocked on the doors of community leaders living near a military outpost in Havana a few weeks ago, asking for the names of everyone in dozens of nearby homes. The U.S. government had attacked the capital of Venezuela, capturing President Nicolas Maduro and killing more than 100 people, including 32 Cubans who were guarding Mr. Maduro. So the Cuban agents were clearly making contingency plans for a similar strike on potential targets in Cuba, the community leader said. One was told that evacuation plans were being drawn up. The idea seemed reasonable enough. Even as normal life continues, anxiety is palpable on the island. The United States attacked Venezuela, a key Cuban ally. President Trump last week proposed a friendly takeover. Now, the United States has launched a major assault on Iran, and its supreme leader is dead. Many Cubans are wondering if they are next. I am afraid of a military invasion, one of the communist leaders said, speaking on the condition that her name not be published because she was not authorized to discuss her interactions with the counterintelligence services. The entire country is afraid. Cuba, a country suffering from a severe energy shortage, largely brought on by Mr. Trump's blockade of foreign oil shipments that has set off a deepening humanitarian crisis, is caught in a Faustian bargain. Many Cubans are enduring the worst moments of their lives and are eager for an end to the 67-year-old communist government that jails opponents, suppresses free speech, and controls a failed centralized economy. But an actual military conflict, which could lead to civilian casualties, would be a high price to pay, many Cubans say, and the frightening prospect is a divisive issue in this nation of 9 million people and among the millions of exiles, many of whom are eager to see the government toppled. Since the capture of Mr. Maduro, Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel has ordered an increase in military exercises, though most Cuban military equipment is obsolete and hails from the Soviet era, according to Hal Klepek, Professor Emeritus of History and Strategy at the Royal Military College of Canada. An independent news site, 14Y Medio, on Saturday reported seeing military caravans patrolling at night. Mr. Diaz-Canel called the attack on Iran a violation of the country's sovereignty and a violation of international law. The international community must act immediately to stop this aggression and escalation, he wrote. Last week, an attempted invasion came from an unexpected source. The Cuban government said that 10 Cubans living in the United States tried an armed incursion into the island but got into a gunfight with border guards that left 4 of them dead and 6 wounded. Peter Kornbluh, co-author of Black Channel to Cuba, a chronicle of secret negotiations between Cuba and Washington, who recently returned from the island, said that the killing of Iranian leaders serves as a dagger to the throat for the Cuban government, signaling that the Trump administration may pursue forced regime change despite continuing diplomatic negotiations. Still, Mr. Kornbluh said that Cuban officials he spoke to are sticking to their posture of nationalist dignity, saying that they remain open to dialogue but refuse to negotiate under the threat of obliteration. The Trump administration suggested that its plan is for the Cuban government to collapse under the weight of economic sanctions, not rocket fire. Asked the day after the Venezuela strikes whether he planned action in Cuba, Mr. Trump said, "I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. Looks like it's going down. It's going down for the count." Some Cubans said that they haven't had the time to think about the possibility of hostilities with a far more powerful nation whose military capability dwarfs Cuba's. They've been too busy dealing with a laundry list of problems, including extended power outages, a lack of gas, and increasing difficulty finding food at local markets. Others, however, are eager for Mr. Trump to do, once and for all, what 12 U.S. presidents before him failed to accomplish: remove the communist government in Cuba. I think that many people are expecting that he'll be the one to force things to change. I'm convinced. said Rita Garcia Morris, executive director of the Christian Center for Reflection and Dialogue, a religious nonprofit group in Cardenas, 90 miles east of Havana. What they want is for it to happen right now. Ms. Garcia said she hoped for a negotiated solution that keeps in mind the suffering in Cuba, where hospitals are canceling surgeries, food is rotting in ports because there's no gas to transport it, and airlines have suspended flights because there is so little jet fuel. As a Christian woman, I can't support that, she said of what Cubans are experiencing. Even in a country where long lines at supermarkets and crushing poverty are commonplace, the current energy crisis has caused a free fall and pushed the government to what experts say is an existential corner. After attacking Venezuela on January 3rd and taking over its oil industry, the Trump administration prevented Venezuela from sending oil to Cuba. Cuba's government had long depended on Venezuela for about a third of the 100,000 barrels it needs each day to run factories, public transportation, and keep the lights on. A few weeks later, in a sharply worded executive order, Mr. Trump threatened tariffs on any nation that provided oil to Cuba, which largely affected Mexico. Mr. Trump's order framed the issue as a national emergency because Cuba has taken extraordinary actions that harm and threaten the United States. Mr. Trump, without providing any evidence, said that the Cuban government aligns itself with and provides support for numerous hostile countries, transnational terrorist groups, and malign actors adverse to the United States, including Russia, China, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Hamas and Hezbollah serve as an Iranian proxy terror groups. Cuba, like Iran, is on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism, a measure that has further hampered its economy and helped decimate its tourism industry. Cuba has denied Mr. Trump's accusation and denounced the oil blockade as a cruel punishment against the Cuban people. For years, the Cuban government has emphasized that its economic problems are a direct result of the trade embargo that Washington imposed on Cuba in 1960. Amid reports that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been meeting with a grandson of former President Raul Castro, who still wields significant power, Cuban government officials have said that they are open to negotiations provided that Cuba's sovereignty is respected. Lilian Guerra, a Cuban-American historian at the University of Florida, said that Cuban officials are most likely nervous and should be. But she said that if Mr. Trump decapitates the Cuban government by killing Mr. Diaz-Canel or targeting Raul Castro, it would leave a situation similar to Iran, where the powerful Revolutionary Guard remains. The Cuban military and the Interior Ministry are powerful entities in Cuba, and the military controls the country's economy. Since the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ms. Guerra said that she has received several worried text messages from friends in Cuba wondering what would happen to their country. On the island, people do not want war, Ms. Guerra said. Years of economic strain have worn Cubans down, she said, and the internet opened their minds to fight back against decades of indoctrination. More than 2 million people have left Cuba in the past 5 years, and the rest are simply exhausted. The phrase that I hear the most from people is, I don't want to hear any more about that country, she said. But Giovanni Fardalas, a 53-year-old translator in Cuba, said that he thinks there's more support for a military strike than people realize. He said he has spoken to everyone he knows, from the guys drinking cheap alcohol on street corners to people renting out their mansions to high-paying foreign visitors. Everyone says the same thing. The Americans need to come so this can end, he wrote in a text message in all caps. Elena Lopez, a historian in Matanzas, who has written critically about the government, recounted that when she was in college in the 1980s, she was required to spend 2 weeks setting up bunkers along a 30-mile stretch of northern coastal highway east of Havana. We've spent our lives doing defense exercises in contexts where the enemy was supposed to be coming, she said. People are more afraid of the war we're fighting for survival and the precariousness of the situation than something that might come from outside. At the military institution that has been visited by intelligence agencies, houses with dilapidated concrete show years of wear and garbage was piled up by banana trees. There's nothing to be scared of, said a former high school IT teacher who now sells beer and snacks at a kiosk nearby. The only concern is the same old thing. If they're going to cut off the electricity, that there's no gas, that food is expensive, that your salary isn't enough, this is what worries Cubans. She said the military installation appeared to be nothing but a harmless storage depot. Asked what the military stored there, bombs, airplanes? She laughed and said, the only thing they have there is hunger. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Big change seems certain in Iran. What kind is the question? Experts say that Iran's clerical rulers may be too deeply entrenched for Iranians to topple them, and the U.S. and Israeli strikes risk setting off deeper radicalization or violence. The death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah al-Khamenei, is a watershed moment in the 47-year-old existence of the Islamic Republic. The scenes that followed, throngs of Iranians taking to the streets to celebrate, others turning out to grieve, signal the deep uncertainty about what comes next. There are now three key questions. How will protesters respond to President Trump's call to take over the government? Can Iran's authoritarian system survive? And could the attack unleash a chaotic battle for power? Mr. Trump and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have made public appeals to Iran's people, arguing that they have offered them a historic opportunity to topple their brutal authoritarian government. How they envision an unarmed population facing down a heavily armed, ideological-driven security force is less clear. Though it has been only 2 days of strikes, some regional experts are skeptical that an aerial campaign alone could weaken Iran's government enough that Iranians could bring it down with protests. Nonetheless, Iran is headed toward a transformative moment, said Farzan Saved, an analyst on Iran and Middle East politics at the Geneva Graduate Institute in Switzerland. Some kind of change will happen in the system, he said, but in which direction, we don't know. In some ways, Iranians are ever more defiant after facing a brutal crackdown on nationwide anti-government protests in January, in which security forces killed thousands. As the violent repression subsided, the risks were still high even before the bombardment began. Yet students still protested and held sit-ins, and the families of slain protesters used their memorial services to voice dissent. After the authorities confirmed that Ayatollah Khamenei's death in the attack, many Iranians dared to celebrate publicly, but not to the point of risking bloodshed. Arian, a resident of a suburb near Tehran, described seeing people honking in the streets, shouting chants from windows. Like all people interviewed inside the country, he asked to withhold his full name for fear of retaliation. On Sunday morning, Arian said that he saw people dancing and singing in the streets. Until they noticed the arrival of armed members of Iran's Basij, the volunteer militia force aligned with Iran's Revolutionary Guards. When the Basij showed up, everyone got scared and quickly scattered, he said. Even under aerial bombardment, Iran's domestic security apparatus was still making its show of force. Basij forces, estimated to be around 1 million strong around the country, have already been mobilized around the capital. The brutal killing of protesters in January suggests domestic unrest will be met with an iron fist, said Ali Gernamaya, deputy head of the Middle East and North Africa program at the European Council on Foreign Relations, this time under far harsher wartime conditions. Some airstrikes have begun to target Basij and intelligence headquarters, but experts are divided as to whether these airstrikes can inflict enough damage to weaken a deeply entrenched and complex network of security forces across such a large country. The problem is these are very multi-layered targets, said Rasul Dibsalar, an Iran expert at the Catholic University of Milan. You hit one, but there are so many others. I'm not sure how long it can be sustained munitions-wise. Even as strikes wiped out several of Iran's top political and military leaders, official statements went to great lengths to show that the system was prepared for the shock and still functioning. After Ayatollah Khomeini's death, Iranian officials announced that the government would follow the constitutional framework for selecting the country's next leader and that a temporary leadership council would be formed. Ali Larijani, the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, who is seen as the de facto leader behind the scenes, stressed that idea in televised comments urging unity after the Ayatollah's death. Throughout history, the Iranian nation has faced even greater challenges. Even the Mongols plowed through the entire country, yet the people stood firm and defended their land, he said. Such martyrdoms make people resistant and steadfast. But the system could undergo a transformation from within. Mr. Larijani, seen as a pragmatist, is the type of figure observers say could potentially strike a deal with Washington now that Iran's more ideologically driven supreme leader is gone. Some ordinary Iranians said that such a deal, if accompanied by an easing of international sanctions on Iran, may be palatable to many residents who have suffered through so many months of instability and a collapsing economy. Most people aren't chasing deep meaning, said Payman, who's 45, a businessman in Tehran. They just want a normal life, family, work, small goals. If that becomes possible, a lot of people might stop pushing for bigger change. But there's also the possibility Iran's new leaders would turn the state in the opposite direction, making it even more radical. The risk is that the more hardline figures emerge, Mr. Dibsaler said. The fact that the leadership change was brought about by American and Israeli attacks increases that possibility, he said. That works completely against what people wished for, he said. Experts point to several appointments that could tip a transition in this direction. Two of the members of Iran's Interim Leadership Council are hardliners. One of them, Ayatollah Reza Arafi, is from Iran's Council of Guardians, a powerful group of jurists. The other is Gholam Hossein Mohseni-Ejei, the head of the judiciary. The third member, President Mossad Pezeshkian, is a moderate, but had been largely sidelined before the war. Another bellwether is the reported appointment of General Ahmad Vahidi to lead the Revolutionary Guards. He's an incredibly brutal person, so I think they're not going to hesitate to use extreme violence, said Mr. Sabet of the Geneva Graduate Institute. Beyond toppling or transforming Iran's current system is the possibility that the war unleashes chaos in a country of 90 million people that borders 7 countries. There are many potential opponents who could use violence to challenge a weakened state. Some ethnic minorities, like the Kurds and the Baluchis, already have armed opposition groups. Mustafa Hijri, the leader of the Kurdistan Democratic Party in Iran, said that his organization was part of an alliance of groups from Iran's ethnic minorities and that among them were parties that, when necessary, may engage in armed resistance as part of their struggle. Officials from 2 Kurdish groups in exile, who asked not to be identified, said that they were planning on trying to restart operations inside the country, aiming to encourage an uprising in Iran's Kurdish region. Even before the war started, many Iranians were bemoaning the increasingly polarized state of the country in the wake of the brutal crackdowns on the protests. The government retains an ideological and religious support base that in the current war would be highly motivated to fight back against perceived threats. That raises the possibility of internal fragmentation and violence that spills beyond Iran's border. On Sunday, Ayatollah Nasser Markarim Shirazi, an influential cleric in Iran, called for jihad against Israel and the United States, according to remarks published in the semi-official Mehr news agency. All of these factors create a growing risk of a dangerous insurgency should the state collapse, similar to the insurgency that broke out in Iraq after U.S. forces invaded it in 2003, said Ms. Garadamaya, the analyst. This is a holy war for them, and they seem willing to burn down the country and region before surrendering, she said. If this air campaign succeeds in toppling Iran's leadership, years of chaos probably lie ahead for the country and its people. As Kennedy turns from vaccines, MAHA allies see a betrayal. As the midterm elections approach, the health secretary is focusing on real food. Anger is rising among some of his supporters. To all appearances, it was the next stage in the dismantling of the American vaccine program. Federal regulators refused last month to review a new mRNA flu shot from Moderna, the latest consequence of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign to give skeptics control of the bureaucracy overseeing inoculations. But then, curiously, regulators had a change of heart. Within weeks, the review of the mRNA shot was back on. The reversal strengthened a belief that has gained traction lately among Mr. Kennedy's most zealous anti-vaccine followers. In their view, the health secretary has erred, not by taking a sledgehammer to the country's vaccine apparatus, but rather by leaving too much of the edifice standing. On Mr. Kennedy's watch, millions of children in recent months still received COVID shots, the deadliest vaccine ever made, as he has falsely described it. The manufacturers remain protected from liability claims, despite Mr. Kennedy's blaming that system 3 years ago for enabling mass murder. Influential vaccine skeptics are starting to depart, even from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the engine of anti-vaccine policy changes this past year. Some of Mr. Kennedy's supporters have responded by accusing pro-vaccine factions of staging a coup at the health department and are vowing to retaliate by deserting the Republican Party in this year's midterm elections. But Mr. Kennedy has largely stopped talking about vaccines at all. On a national tour and in recent social media videos promoting the Make America Healthy Again agenda, he scarcely mentions steps that he's taken to scrap recommended childhood shots, tie autism to vaccines, and call off critical research. Those measures have alienated many Americans and outraged public health experts who fear that they will drive down the use of safe and effective vaccines amid a resurgence of diseases like measles and whooping cough. Instead, with the help of the boxer Mike Tyson, Mr. Kennedy has pivoted toward more politically palatable messages about real food. Now, rank-and-file vaccine opponents are suffering a crisis of faith in their longtime standard-bearer, compounding the fallout within the MAHA movement over Mr. Kennedy's decision to endorse a federal order promoting the weed killer glyphosate. Derek Wynn, who's 35, who lives near Houston, said that he once had seen the health secretary as a fellow traveler in our fight for accountability within the medical industry. A former Army soldier, Mr. Wynn lost his military benefits and moved in with his girlfriend's parents after being discharged in 2022 for refusing a COVID shot. When Mr. Kennedy campaigned for president 2 years later, he cited Mr. Wynn's case in a post online promising accountability. The ex-soldier took heart, believing that he had finally found a politician committed to ending the power of pharmaceutical companies in Washington. He's no longer so sure. They think if they just pacify us and, dangle a couple of illusions in front of us like we got red dyes out of Fruit Loops or whatever, that'll keep us quiet, Mr. Wynn said. But for an anti-vaccine movement still brimming with rage at the federal government's response to the pandemic, the demand that COVID shots be shelved would not abate, he said, despite whatever else Mr. Kennedy does to appease his backers. People are basically kind of seeing through the facade, Mr. Wynn said. It's all just been words. Activists with ties to senior health officials are warning that the MAHA movement, having punished the Democratic Party in 2024 for shunning Mr. Kennedy, will take its anger out on Republicans this year. If the Moderna mRNA flu shot is approved, the medical freedom movement will abandon the Republican Party in the midterm elections. Toby Rogers, a vaccine opponent recently named to a federal autism advisory committee, wrote online, "That's not a threat, that's a promise." He addressed the post to Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, whom vaccine critics have often accused of tying Mr. Kennedy's hands. Jeffrey Tucker, the president of Brownstone Institute, a nonprofit formed in response to COVID restrictions that worked closely with scientists now in key Trump administration roles, called the decision to review the mRNA flu shot a betrayal of the base. In a statement, Emily Hilliard, a spokeswoman for the Department of Health and Human Services, defended its vaccine policies, saying that the federal government had formally asked people to consult with a doctor or provider before receiving a COVID shot because the old blanket recommendation was not supported by the evidence. In the case of the mRNA flu shot, Ms. Hilliard said, Moderna came back to the Food and Drug Administration with additional information and, pending approval, is committed to a study of older adults using a proper control group this time. You are listening now to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The clamor risks spoiling Mr. Kennedy's effort to turn the page on vaccine policy changes that have proven objectionable to many Americans. In recent polling, more people who knew about his rollback of childhood vaccine recommendations said it would hurt rather than help children's health, and the majority disapproved of his handling of vaccine policy. COVID shots have remained vaccine opponents' chief concern, even as evidence has continued to emerge, including in December from Mr. Kennedy's own CDC, that they protected Americans in recent years from severe illness. In all, scientists have found that the shots prevented the deaths of millions of Americans, rarely caused serious health problems, and saved the country more than $1 trillion in additional medical spending, the latest feat for an American vaccination program that has eliminated diseases like smallpox and polio and remains trusted by a majority of people. Uptake of the COVID vaccines has fallen off considerably, but more than 20 million American adults and millions more children received the latest ones in recent months. Hardline vaccine opponents question why the Trump administration had preserved such wide access to a shot that its own health officials had claimed, without providing detail, killed at least 10 children. It is beyond belief that these shots are still being given, said Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, an ear, nose, and throat doctor who has supported using the drug ivermectin to treat COVID and has campaigned for pulling COVID vaccines from the market. Of Mr. Kennedy, she said, I doubt he would have risen to prominence and to power without our backing, and he has sort of turned his back on us. Still, in polls, most Republicans said they approved of the health secretary, and American parents overwhelmingly support proposals to crack down on processed foods, dyes, and chemical additives, which, along with opposition to vaccines and environmental toxins, are core concerns of the loosely assembled MAHA movement. Some defenders of Mr. Kennedy argued that his vaccine agenda had been held back by the pharmaceutical industry's clout within the Trump administration. The system is still inclined to work as a shill for big corporate interests, said Mark Gorton, the president of the MAHA Institute, which is a think tank that supports Mr. Kennedy's agenda. Other vaccine opponents have applauded what they describe as Mr. Kennedy's restraint. Even as federal officials have stopped recommending certain vaccines, they have left the choice in the hands of children's parents and doctors. I think the way in which they are approaching this is very moderate, said Dr. Joseph Aron, the president and chief medical officer of the Independent Medical Alliance, which has promoted unproven COVID treatments. They're not going, hey, no more vaccines. That very moderation sits uneasily with devoted anti-vaccine activists, including some whom Mr. Kennedy once embraced. They described the rollback of childhood vaccine recommendations as ineffectual. So far, major medical groups had rejected the new child vaccine schedule, they noted, and even some Republican-led states had openly departed from it. Under the banner of groups like Americans for Health Freedom, which is led by Dr. Bowden, vaccine opponents are campaigning for state and federal lawmakers who join calls to pull COVID vaccines off the market. Among the backers of such a proposal is Representative Thomas Massie, a Kentucky Republican and a longtime thorn in the administration's side, who said in December, take the jabs off the market. Children's Health Defense, the anti-vaccine nonprofit founded by Mr. Kennedy, petitioned the FDA in December to revoke the licenses for the Pfizer and Moderna COVID shots. Sasha Latipova, whose work was cited in that petition and was interviewed on Mr. Kennedy's podcast in 2022 and 2023, criticized him for keeping what she saw as the most problematic vaccines on the childhood schedule. She also bemoaned his failure to revoke an emergency declaration that protects COVID vaccine makers from liability claims. After she published an open letter demanding an end to the liability protections last year, she said Mr. Kennedy called and spoke to her briefly. He said, "I know what you want me to do, but I have the president to report to," Ms. Latapova said in an interview. Ray Flores, senior outside counsel to Children's Health Defense, who helped prepare the COVID vaccines petition, said that revoking the immunity declaration for COVID vaccine makers was as simple as the stroke of a pen. Asked why Mr. Kennedy had not taken that step, Mr. Flores paused and said, "Pressure, and I think I should leave it at that." Having stoked so much suspicion of the American vaccine program, the Trump administration is now struggling to persuade the anti-vaccine movement that any parts of the program should remain. They say, "Oh, we took 6 vaccines off the schedule, and that serves as a pressure relief valve for 2 or 3 weeks," Mr. Wynn said, "but they're just kicking the can down the road." As the midterm begins, Texas offers a test case for both parties. Should Democrats concentrate on swing voters or their base? Can more traditional Republicans win the MAGA era? Tuesday's Senate primary in Texas will show the direction the parties are taking. As the midterm elections that will decide who controls Congress get fully underway this week with the first primary contests, both parties are grappling with one of the central questions of American politics in the Trump era. Do voters want partisan rage or a political reset? In the midst of one of the most volatile political moments in decades, Democrats are trying to figure out whether their path back to power is to re-energize their base with fiery appeals or to court swing voters. Republicans are testing the continuing power of the MAGA brand over traditional conservatism. Those dynamics are being tested in Texas, where voters go to the polls today, Tuesday, to cast their ballots in primaries for the U.S. Senate that have already broken records for early voting turnout and political spending. Senator John Cornyn, a four-term senator once seen as the courtly conservative embodiment of the Texas Republican brand, is fighting for his political life against Ken Paxton, the state's scandal-scarred attorney general, who is beloved by the MAGA base. On the Democratic side, James Tallarico, the state representative, made a point of campaigning in counties that President Trump won in and of speaking about his vision of progressive Christianity. He faces Representative Jasmine Crockett, a firebrand lawmaker with a national profile who argues that Democrats can win by making bold appeals to inspire their base to vote. The results could offer an early indication of the direction that the parties and voters are heading as they look toward the midterm contests and beyond to the 2028 presidential primary races. This year, Democrats are fighting an uphill battle to reclaim the Senate by flipping seats in swing states including Alaska, Maine, North Carolina, and Ohio, while defending the states that they hold. Snapshots of the candidates as they traveled across the state to the worship halls of black churches in Dallas and San Antonio, border town swap meets, and East Texas barbecue joints capture the contours of a vicious and expensive primary race where the divides are more stylistic than ideological. It has been the most expensive primary on record, according to Ad Impact, a media tracking firm, with more than $110 million spent so far. The majority of the money is going toward buttressing Mr. Cornyn, who remains in a tight race with Mr. Paxton after running attack ads for months. A third candidate, Representative Wesley Hunt, who's a 2-term congressman from Houston, is also running, which makes it likely that the Republican race ends up in a runoff in late May. On the Democratic side, the matchup between Mr. Tallarico and Ms. Crockett, both staunch opponents of the president on nearly every issue, has fueled a surge in early voting turnout far beyond what the party has seen in recent primaries. "We should all feel really good about this," said Emily Ruiz, the former White House political director for the Biden administration and Texas political consultant, who is uncommitted in the race. Still, strategists from both parties agree that regardless of the nominees, Democrats are going to face a steep climb in November. No Democrat has won a statewide race in Texas since 1994. Karl Rove, a top White House advisor to former President George W. Bush, who got his start in Texas politics, put it simply, Texas is not New Jersey in waiting, he said. The Cornyn campaign was not expecting a crowd. The outdoor restaurant patio alongside a howling interstate highway in Houston could accommodate only several dozen people. Far fewer were in attendance, a group of mostly longtime supporters and old friends, when Senator Cronin arrived. I'm here to tell you that I believe that character still matters, Mr. Cronin said to polite applause. I know that the people of Texas are with me. Through the bitter campaign, Mr. Cronin has maintained his even-spoken senatorial composure, even as supporters have grown increasingly desperate to save his political life. His campaign and allied super PACs have spent more than $60 million on the primary so far, blanketing the airwaves and social media across Texas with messages linking Mr. Cornyn to Mr. Trump, attacking Mr. Paxton and Mr. Hunt, and adopting hardline stances as popular among the state's Republican primary voters, including some with pronounced anti-Muslim rhetoric. Still, Mr. Cronin, who's 74 years old, has struggled to reintroduce himself to Texas Republicans who have grown up voting for him but appear to have soured on the kind of deal-making politics that he represents. He's a statesman, and I don't know if our society will tolerate statesmen anymore, said Susan Feather, a Houston Republican who has long backed Mr. Cronin. It makes me cry. Among the most effective criticism has been deriding Mr. Cronin's style in supporting a bipartisan gun safety measure in the aftermath of the 2022 school massacre in Uvalde, Texas. He was roundly booed for the effort at a state party convention at the time, and it still ruffles many Republicans. Mr. Cronin has argued that his votes have been in lockstep with Mr. Trump. At times, he's appeared motivated at least as much by his firm desire to prevent Mr. Paxton from ascending to the Senate after years of legal and ethical scandals as to hold on to the seat. In the waning days of the primary campaign, Mr. Cronin has warned that Republicans down the ballot in Texas would suffer if Mr. Paxton were the nominee for Senate. Ken Paxton would be the kiss of death for Republicans, Mr. Cronin said. It is a message the Republican political consultant said was aimed in part at convincing Mr. Trump to throw him a lifeline by finally endorsing. So far, Mr. Trump has said he supports all three candidates. On Wednesday evening in Dallas, Mr. Tellerico was preaching the politics of love from the campaign stump. It's an unusual message from a politician, he admitted to the crowd, but is one the 36-year-old believes that the divided nation desperately needs to hear. His pitch is aimed at expanding his support to include moderate and Republican voters, a necessity in a state Mr. Trump won by nearly 14 points in 24. But the heart of his message is a spiritual and cultural appeal to win disaffected Trump voters through the language of faith and working-class economic anxiety. The enemy, he argues, isn't Republicans or even Mr. Trump. It's a billionaire class that divides the nation by party, by race, by gender, by religion, through social media algorithms that have turned politics into a circus of trolling and insults. By convincing enough Democratic primary voters to embrace expanding their tent over their rage at the Trump administration may be difficult. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 3rd, 2026 issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Jeff Shapiro. Thank you for listening.